All right, conceptually, this piece could be in a web banner, it could be on a web page, or it could be in a book, or part of another design element that I might be putting together in Illustrator or InDesign. Depending on the output, I need to be very aware of how I'm saving this. First and foremost, it's important to understand that the mode or color model that this is created in Photoshop from scratch, in this case, was RGB, or subtractive color. Certain colors, such as orange and green, will have major shifts between the RGB color space and the CMY color space. And that is mostly because certain colors just cannot be printed as vibrantly as phosphors of our screen can project them. So this image is currently in the RGB color space, as I mentioned, and if I knew that this book was going to be printed in a 4-color printing environment, I would need to change this to CMYK. Now, if you want to take a look here, there is a setting. This is kind of an interesting thing to check out here under View, and this setting is called the gamut warning. Gamut, or range of color, refers to the space, the color space that you're choosing, and whether or not the color that you've chosen or colors that you have in your document will print correctly. When I choose this choice, gamut warning, and I let it go, you can see that I'm going to have problems. Gamut warning is showing me that all content that's showing up gray here will not print precisely in CMYK. Everything that's gray is in trouble. It's in the trouble range. So it's important that I made this document in orange because I wanted you to see what would happen when I went into this. It was premeditated here because I knew that this would give me a gamut warning in orange. And if I go back, all this yellowy orange stuff comes back looking normal. And now if I look at this setting here, image, mode, or model, and I set it to CMYK, it's not as harsh as it would seem. However, the first thing that Photoshop wants to do here is it wants to merge the layers. And considering that I would likely at this stage after this be putting it someplace else, I now am going to change the warning. Change the setting. And I did get a color shift. I don't know if you're going to notice that on yours, but it did shift a lot. So what could I do about that if I don't want it to happen? Okay, so check it out. Try your settings. I'm going to undo. Man, I lost a lot of that cool looking cyan. And again, when I go back to my CMYK mode and I click merge and I click OK, it just gets dull. I lose a lot of the highlighty bright stuff. So I'm going to undo again and show you what I can try and do about this. So I'll give you a moment. The truth is the CMYK color palette it should be actually possible for it to print this cyan color, though maybe not quite as bright. And when I sample this color by using my magic dropper tool, I can see that that really just looks like a pretty pure cyan color. So I think I can actually fix this in the CMYK document. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do in the next part here. So I'll give you another moment, and then I'm going to try to create this or recreate this again into CMYK and bump up the contrast and do a couple other things here. So I'm going to... Okay, so on the left side I have my CMYK version of the image that I saved a moment ago, and on the right side I have the RGB version, and I'm working on the left side trying to get these two to match more closely. And I've added a layer, adjustment layer, to the left image. And I'm setting the setting for the color I want to change on cyan. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove yellow from cyan, and it looks no different. And I'm going to remove magenta from that cyan, and it looks no different. And I'm going to bump the cyan up, and it looks darker instead of lighter. When I lower it a little on my monitor, on my screen, it actually looks closer. So as I decrease the amount of cyan in the cyan, it brings up the brightness, which looks better on my monitor, not so great on the TV. So that's adjustment 1. And I'll close the adjustment. And then I'm going to add another adjustment. And this next adjustment is on top of the rest of the adjustments. So it's going to go on top of selective color. I'm going to add another one here, and I'm going to choose, let me click away first. I'm going to add another adjustment layer, and this one is for hue saturation. And here I'm going to go to the cyans again, and I'm going to increase the saturation in the cyans. And though you may not be able to see it, it is actually bumping up the intensity. And I might want to do the same thing to the yellow. Increase the saturation. And that's a lot closer. Again, I'm going to hold it up because I don't really feel like, I'm just going to pull this out. There we go. A little spazzing, and we're back here again. All right. So hard to do this, but they're much closer now. Where they were, this side was so dull. So it's a combination of bumping up the cyan, both in saturation and selective color. And that is recorded for your viewing pleasure later. All right, now I got to plug this back in. While you're playing with that. Yes, question.
Would you get the same results if you did the adjustment layers in the opposite one?
Well, I think that's an excellent question because in this case they probably won't make a big difference, but in some images it may look may indeed look different. It's important to notice that you can change the stacking order of these. It looks exactly the same either way on this image. I'm not seeing any change, but on some images it might. Okay, now I'm going to close the RGB one because this lesson is focused on print. I'm going to give you another moment there. All right, just another moment or two. Bless you. All right, so are you ready to move on? Are you okay? All right, so now we need to talk about this. Now, if we come over here to edit, the edit menu, please notice there's a setting here, an item here called color settings. This is key. The current color settings on this image are using 4CMYK, which is really what we're concerned about. US web coded swap. And these numbers here, dot gain 20, dot gain 20. These numbers here, this dot gain situation is really important when you're printing on different surfaces. Dot gain refers to the amount of swelling that sure, no worries. The dot gain refers to a swelling of a pixel or a dot of ink on a specific type of printing surface, which, as I mentioned, could be anything from metal to cardboard to a hard paper to a soft paper to Formica. So you have to talk to your printer and call them and say, hey, I'm doing this. What do you want the dot gain setting set on? Most of the time, these numbers are fine, but not with special surfaces. So I need you to see that and know that, okay? That's the first thing. There's also a ton of other settings in here. These are presets. And different countries have different ways in which their printing presses work, and therefore different settings. So if I changed this to North American Web Internet, see, my numbers are shifting. And if I change it again to, let's say, European prepress, I get 15% instead of 20. And I'm going to put it back to general purpose. I really didn't change anything, but I pointed out to you something key, which you need to know when you go to printing. So I'm just going to leave it alone, clicking OK. I really didn't change anything. Next is I want to look at when I do save as. What happens to this file? Depending on the purpose, you may want to save a Photoshop version. And you may also want to have another version that you're going to place in your other applications in Design Illustrator. My favorite file format for placing things in other applications from Photoshop is TIFF, stands for Tagged Image File Format. It is not a lossy format. JPEG is a lossy format, loses quality. TIFF maintains all the quality. It also lets you keep a clipping mask, a clipping path, and I'll tell you what that is another night. But it's probably enough for tonight just to talk about these items. So I'll set that on TIFF, and I can keep layers or not keep layers. In this case, I'm not going to keep layers. And then it's going to want to do a save a copy. You can see here, it says save a copy. So it's one or the other, layers or save a copy. And you can also see that it's embedding our color profile. Very important. So I'm going to save this to the desktop because this is not all. When I click save, I get this next dialog box. So again, if you are saving a very large image, you may need to have different settings for compression on the image. Most of the time, unless you become a billboard designer, where you actually would need to set different settings, and there's seriously different settings for the way the dots work, this will probably be fine for most things. But be aware if you're doing something very large, you may need to change these settings. What's also interesting is that if the byte order is on IBM PC, versus Macintosh. I never have changed it for Mac to Mac, but I do know people who do change it because they're sharing across different platforms. Some people at their organization have Macs, others have PCs. Okay. Then I'm going to click OK. And now it's actually saved as a TIFF. But it's saved as. So this one is a copy. This is not the TIFF. I mean, this is not at all the TIFF is the copy. So if I go open recent, you don't even see it in here. And if I go to open, I saved it to my desktop, and here it is. And it is not layered. And again, if I go arrange and I put them two up under arrange, two up vertically, they look identical. And they are identical, except one has layers and the other one doesn't. Layers. No layers. Okay, so the TIFF is the one I would use for placing in Illustrator or InDesign. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.